So let me introduce Lexi Rees. She's the clinical lead dietitian for Dementia and Wellbeing Community Team, and she is part of University Health Board in West Wales. Is that right?
Yep, well, I'm part of Howth University, Health Board in West Wales.
And you're going to talk about a step care approach to preventing malnutrition in people living with dementia.
Yes, yep.
Yep. Off you go.
Off I go. Hopefully it'll let me share my presentation.
Yeah, looks
Yep.
like it's starting. Yeah, pop it in slideshow mode.
Oh, hang on.
And off you go.
Think about it. Hang on. It's because my toolbar's above my
Oh, we're nearly there.
Nearly there. Look. Right there.
That's it.
That's
excellent.
it.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you for letting me come and talk to you this afternoon about a step-care approach to preventing malnutrition for people living with dementia. I just wanted to start with a couple of facts. So good nutrition is obviously important, vital for everybody, but it's really vital for the health, independence and well-being of people living with dementia through all stages of their illness. So at each stage of the illness, nutrition remains really important to help maintain not just physical, but also psychological well-being. So I thought before I went into a step care approach, I'd just put up a reminder or sort of run through how dementia can affect nutritional intake. So some of the common symptoms linked to dementia that can affect appetite and intake include things like memory loss, cognitive difficulties, perceptual changes, and an increased activity. So just thinking about memory loss, how does memory loss affect somebody, what, how they eat and drink or what they eat and drink? So perhaps people forget to shop or forget how to prepare and cook food or meals, or perhaps they forget that they've already got certain ingredients and certain items in their cupboard and end up overbuying these. So they end up with cupboard fulls of tins of beans or food going off. Perhaps they forget how to cook their favorite meal. Perhaps they forget that it's a meal time and that they need to cook something. People can forget the importance and enjoyment of eating. So again, that need and those hunger signals can become forgotten or misinterpreted. So again, people don't feel hungry and they end up sort of missing meals or eating smaller amounts. And then in some cases, although it tends to be less common, they might have forgotten that they've already eaten. So they might sort of say, oh, where's my lunch? And they've just finished their lunch. Or, you might pop and see a relative or somebody that you're caring for and they say, oh, no, I haven't eaten breakfast. But you can see, there's clearly an empty bowl of Weetabix or, a plate that's had toast on it by the side. So they have eaten, but they've forgotten that they've eaten. If that happens, that tends to be in the earlier stages of dementia, whereas as dementia progresses, people tend to experience more of the problems of forgetting how to eat and forgetting the importance of needing to eat. So alongside memory loss, people often experience cognitive changes, and this can cause difficulty with the actual process of eating and drinking. So maybe a meal is put down in front of somebody and they're not sure what they need to do with it. Perhaps they start to have difficulty using knives and forks or cutlery. Perhaps they start to have difficulty recognizing that it's a food or it's a drink, which again can impact on somebody's fluid intake. Like Diane and Abby were just talking about, the importance of hydration and preventing dehydration. People can experience difficulty with coordination. So again, when using knives and forks, or trying to lift a cup to their mouth, or again when they're eating a meal, they can have difficulty with coordinating the process of that. And again, as dementia progresses, people might start to experience swallowing difficulties. They might find it more difficult to drink normal fluids, or perhaps find textures a bit more difficult to manage. Also, in some cases, it might not be that they've got a swallowing difficulty as such, but people can still start to prefer certain textures or avoid different textures. I popped out to see a gentleman this week that was living at home with his wife, and they were reporting that he now avoids things like bread and mashed potato. It just seems that he finds that it's difficult, the texture, to manage when it's when it's in his mouth. He finds it uncomfortable, or he doesn't like how it feels in his mouth. So he's gone to avoiding sort of bread and mashed potato, even though he doesn't seem to have a difficulty in swallowing it. He's just, gone off the texture and how it feels in his mouth. And then communication difficulties. So people can experience difficulties communicating, maybe if they're hungry, if they're not hungry, you know, what they fancy. That same gentleman that I was just talking about, he's experiencing word finding difficulties associated with living with Alzheimer's disease. So his wife was finding it quite difficult in trying to suggest things for their lighter meal. Because he doesn't eat bread, they'd have typically had things like toast or sandwiches, but because he doesn't eat that now, it was trying to find you know, a suitable alternative that would, you know, provide plenty of nourishment as well as being tasty. And with his word finding difficulties, she was finding it difficult to say, oh, what do you fancy, or what would you like, because he would then, you know, find it difficult to respond. So we talked about, you know, maybe they could take pictures of different items that they usually have, or at the moment he goes into the kitchen with her and they have a look in the cupboards and in the fridge and things like that, so that he can indicate what he might fancy, or what he might like to eat. So in relation to sensory changes, people living with dementia can often experience problems with hearing. Hearing loss is associated with dementia and developing dementia as well, but when living with dementia, people can experience hearing difficulties, making it hard for them to block out sounds or background noise. So again, if you've got quite a noisy environment when somebody's trying to eat and drink, and perhaps they need more concentration to be able to eat a meal or drink their cup of tea, then if there's a lot of background noise and a lot of things going on, then it can make it quite hard for them to hear and concentrate fully on what they need to do. Eyesight, so people's eyesight can be affected. And again, when we think about it, most people living with dementia tend to be older. You know, you do get sort of young onset dementia, but most of the time it tends to be older adults that are living with dementia. So, you know, our eyesight can change and we can have difficulties with our eyesight as we get older anyway. But on top of that, people living with dementia can experience additional changes in their eyesight, or being able to focus on things as easily. So again, it can make it difficult for them perhaps to see that there's a meal in front of them, if they're in quite a dark room or not a well-lit environment when they're having something to eat and drink. Taste changes. As we get older, we tend to lose a lot of our taste buds, or they can change, and this seems to especially happen for people living with dementia. So a lot of the meals that perhaps they used to enjoy can end up feeling quite bland, can end up tasting quite bland, so that they don't enjoy them as much, they don't eat as much. And again, if you kind of couple that perhaps with communication difficulties that they might be experiencing, it might be quite difficult to understand why somebody is no longer eating all of their favorite meal or their favorite food, or perhaps they, you know, they had a particular snack or drink that they enjoyed, which now they don't seem to enjoy as much and aren't eating and drinking as readily. Quite a lot of people develop a sweet tooth. So again, it could be somebody that didn't used to take sugar in their tea, but now likes 3 sugars in their tea. And perhaps now they prefer sort of spicy foods or foods with a lot more flavour, whereas previously, you know, maybe they enjoyed more kind of traditional meals. And then finally, sort of changes in perception. So perhaps patterns on a plate can appear like they're moving. Perhaps it can appear dirty. Again, perhaps people can have difficulty seeing what's on the plate in front of them. So perhaps they might see only one half of the plate. So you might find that they always eat one half of the plate and they don't eat the food on the other side. And you might feel it's because they don't like that, but it could be because they actually can't see that there is food or the other half of the plate. So they haven't eaten it because they don't know that it's there. So I'll talk a little bit more. I've got some practical tips in a couple of slides time. So I talk about some things that you can do to help if you feel that's maybe the issue that's reducing somebody's appetite and dietary intake. And then finally, increased activity. So perhaps somebody finds it quite difficult to settle at meal times because, again, they've forgotten the importance and the need to sort of sit and eat to fuel their body and make sure that they are getting enough energy and enough nutrition to keep them well. So perhaps somebody doesn't settle very well at meal times, or perhaps whatever their current reality is, they feel like they should be somewhere else or should be doing something else. So again, they don't really want to settle for a meal because they're not aware that it's lunchtime or it's breakfast time, and they feel that they should be somewhere else or doing something else. Perhaps somebody's just generally more active around their home environment, again, for that reason. So you can find that people become at risk of malnutrition, so that even if they are still eating, you know, they're eating plenty and they're drinking well, that just because they've got that increased activity, they're actually sort of burning more energy during the day. So they need to increase their dietary intake more to make up for the fact that they're more active around their home environment. Perhaps disturbed sleep patterns. So Again, maybe somebody's awake much more during the night and then sleeping during the day. So again, they're missing meals because they're sleeping during the times that they would typically have had food and drinks, and now they're awake more during the night, when it's perhaps more difficult to get people to eat plenty, so that their time clock is shifted. Or again, even just the fact that they're up and about a bit more during the night, perhaps that's increasing their requirements. So again, they need to eat and drink a bit more to make sure that they're getting plenty of energy. And it could be a fact that they're looking for meaningful activity. So perhaps it's somebody that has always been quite an active person, has always, liked to keep busy. They were always doing different jobs around the house, or perhaps they had lots of different hobbies. And now, since they've been living with dementia, those things aren't available for them to do so easily anymore, but they're still looking to kind of keep busy or look for those sorts of things to do. Perhaps their job was they were a carpenter, so they're busy looking around for tools to fix things because they're seeing things and think they need fixing, and they're looking for those sorts of activities and things to do that they would previously have done on a regular basis. So some practical tips to kind of counterbalance all of those different reasons why somebody might not be eating very well, or why they might be losing weight, or why they might be at risk of malnutrition, or even if their weight is quite stable, why they could still be at risk of malnutrition because perhaps their diet has become quite restricted, so they're not eating such a wide range of food to be able to make sure that they're getting a good balance of all the different nutrients that they need. So some things to try are things like a regular routine, so trying to keep to sort of specific meal times that the person is familiar with, prompts and cues, so talking about the upcoming meal or what they fancy for breakfast or lunch, trying to keep somebody involved in the meal time. So could they help wash vegetables, chop vegetables, lay the table? Could they help with stirring a sauce? All those sorts of things, because those sorts of cues are also like physiological cues and sort of ingrained cues that then would help somebody to recognize the fact that it's coming up to a meal time and it's going to be time to eat, so that it gets them ready for a meal time and gets them easier to settle and enjoy their meals and their food. Cooking smells, even. Have you ever been somewhere and that's that like lovely smell of, I don't know, like fresh coffee or fresh bread, or you go into the supermarket and it smells of those things, and without knowing it, your tummy starts growling because you think, oh, that smells really good, or that smells really enticing. Or even if you've been out all day at work and you come home and somebody's cooking and preparing a meal, and you walk through the door and you've got that lovely cooking smell, again, it kind of just gives all those natural cues and signals that I'm going to be eating soon. There's something tasty that's being prepared, it's coming up to a meal time. So to try and get around, if somebody's having difficulties with their hearing or with their eyesight, trying to make the mealtime environment as distraction free, as a calm environment. Make sure there's good lighting so that people can clearly see the meal in front of them, that people are sat in a nice upright position, with next to a table and chairs, if that's what they're used to. Perhaps they'd got used to the eating in front of the television while they watch their favorite soap, or the lunchtime news. So if that's what would be a cue for them to know that it's time for breakfast or time for lunch or time for a meal, then roll with that. But if it's generally, people tend to eat better sat upright around a table with plenty of social interaction, because the other important thing to not forget is that lots of our meals and lots of the time that we're eating and drinking, there's a lot of social interaction going on, whether it's with our families, we go out to meet friends for coffee or cake or meals, even if it's during the working day, perhaps everybody takes a pause at lunchtime and you all sort of sit around and have your packed lunch or grab something from the canteen and eat together and catch up on each other's lives. So that social interaction can help take the focus and off the actual meal and the process of eating a meal, so that somebody can still enjoy their meal time and can eat alongside the social interaction. Color contrast. So this is, like I was saying, if people are finding it difficult to see food on their plate, it could be that if you had, I don't know, broccoli, carrots, mashed potato and chicken on a plate, you might find somebody only eats the cauliflower on the on a white plate, sorry. You might find somebody only eats the cauliflower and the broccoli. It's not necessarily because they don't like the chicken and the mashed potato. It could be that they can't see it on the white plate because it's kind of melded into the background of that white plate. So if you can get a nice plain coloured plate, nothing with a pattern on, because again, if somebody's having those perceptual changes or disturbances, a pattern could look like it's moving, or that there's dirt on the plate. So a nice colour contrast so that it's easy for them to see the food that's on their plate, and preferably the contrast with the table or the tablecloth underneath, so everything's, you know, as easily visible as possible. The general recommendation tends to be blue plates, as there's not many naturally occurring blue foods, but as long as there's that nice colour contrast, then it doesn't really matter. But just to make sure that it's plain, and like I said, no nice patterns on it that can again be a distraction. For somebody that's finding it difficult either to settle at meal times or maybe having difficulty using cutlery, finger foods can be a really great option, because either somebody can eat them as they walk around their environment, or if somebody's having difficulty with using knives and forks and spoons, then by providing them with finger foods, it helps them to maintain their independence at meal times. And there's quite a lot of evidence around to suggest that if you maintain somebody's independence at a meal time, they tend to eat and drink better. And then enhancing the taste of meals. So if somebody's had taste changes, then using things like herbs, spices, nice strong flavours, maybe adding sweet taste to savoury meals, so things like cranberry sauces, apple sauces, roasting vegetables and honey. All of those things can help improve somebody's intake of a meal. And then just the final reminder, try to avoid meal times becoming a task-based exercise. Try and keep them so that it's, you know, that source of enjoyment, that social interaction, and don't let them become too long. So small and frequent meals and snacks again might be better. But what I wanted to mention is, what if it's not the symptoms of dementia causing a poor appetite and intake? What if it's something else, but we're just maybe presuming that it's symptoms of dementia that's causing the reduced appetite and intake and the risk of malnutrition? So that's where a stepped care approach can come in. So it's trying to identify the root cause of a reduced appetite and intake to make sure that we can provide appropriate advice and support to get around whatever that issue is that's causing somebody to have a reduced appetite and intake. So in a stepped care approach, ideally the step 0 should be your food first approach. So that's where you're adding extra calories and protein to your meals, so fortifying your meals, trying to provide a nourishing drink, so something like a homemade milkshake made with whole milk and cream, or this time of year is great for things like hot chocolate, Horlicks, Ovaltine, that again is made with whole milk, and added skim milk powder, again to add extra calories and protein. Offering nourishing snacks between meals and before bed. Small and often meals and snacks if somebody's appetite has got smaller. Trying to make sure there's food available, you know, as much of the day as possible, especially if somebody's got an altered sleep pattern. And if you find somebody's really not doing very well with like the savoury side of the meal, then offering additional helpings of pudding. So that would be your step 0. And then if you find that still hasn't helped somebody to reduce their risk of malnutrition or maintain their weight, then looking at, is it a physical health cause? Because again, like I said, a lot of people living with dementia tend to be older adults, so they might already have, you know, other comorbid conditions, such as things like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, IBS, diabetes that might not be completely well managed. Perhaps they've got a urinary tract infection or a chest infection which is needed to be treated by antibiotics, which can affect somebody's appetite or intake. Other comorbidities such as cancer. Perhaps they're experiencing constipation or dehydration. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that pain is often misdiagnosed or undiagnosed in people living with dementia. So you can imagine you probably wouldn't feel like eating and drinking a huge amount if you're experiencing pain. And it could be that because that person is living with dementia and experiencing communication difficulties, that they're not able to tell you this is the reason why they've got a poor appetite and intake. So it's just going through and making sure that we've ruled out any physical health cause for why somebody is not eating and drinking as well, before we just presume that it's linked to the symptoms that I was talking about with their dementia. And then if it's not a physical health a physical health reason, then perhaps just working our way and thinking about some of these things. So again, what was that person's usual habits, rituals and routines? Were they somebody that never ate breakfast? The chances are they're not all of a sudden going to start eating, you know, a huge bowl of fortified porridge with cream and skim milk powder and you know, fruit and honey and things like that in it. As wonderful as that would be to prevent malnutrition, the chances of that happening, you know, are not that high. So working with what their usual habits, rituals and routines were, what their life story is, you know, what was their job, what was their occupation, were they somebody, I've previously supported people that used to be lorry drivers, so their fluid intake has always been not particularly great because they didn't want to have lots of toilet breaks. You know, they got used to sort of eating on things that they could grab when they stopped at service stations, so things like sandwiches and easy and quick things. So again, it's providing advice around what their usual habits and routines were, rather than then trying to move it to what, you know, what we might ideally like them to have. Maybe what somebody's current reality is. So perhaps they've gone back to a time in their life when they were working, or they had a family, so they're waiting for a partner or a loved one or their children to come home before they feel that they can eat. Perhaps if they're in a care home environment, they feel that they're at a cafe or a restaurant, so they feel the need to be able to pay. So can we, you know, provide some money or some way so that they feel that they've paid for their meal rather than them not eating it. Again, when it comes back to that mealtime environment, trying to limit distractions and make it still very much like a social interaction and social engagement. And finding out, yeah, people's personal preferences. So, you know, what's their favorite type of drink? What's, you know, how do they take their toast? How do they prefer their meals? You know, have they always been quite small, you know, preferred small portions? Have they been a three meal a day but big portions and no snacks in between sort of person? Trying to find all of those things out so that the diet that we're recommending or that we're supporting or that we're trying to provide fits in with that as well. And then if none of those have been successful, then that's, you know, maybe the time to look for additional support from, you know, like dietitians or dietetics or other, you know, specialist support. So perhaps occupational therapists could come in and help with sort of seating arrangements or specialist equipment. You know, maybe we can look at using oral nutritional supplements, but that would be, yeah, the couple of steps on. And then I just wanted to finish my presentation with my favorite quote from Tom Kitwood, who says, you know, make sure that we're seeing the person with dementia and not the person with dementia, so that, you know, we're focusing on that person, and the dementia is maybe the smallest part of it rather than the biggest part of it. So yeah, if you've got any questions, then feel free to pop them in the chat, or that's my contact details if anybody would like to get in touch afterwards. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. That was great. And I loved Tom Kitwood at the end. We've got a lot to be thankful for, haven't we?
We have indeed, yes. Yeah.
We have. I think we've all enjoyed this, sharing the stepped approach. I think it's really interesting the way that you set that out. And it reminds us about lots of things about memory loss and cognitive changes, and how texture and can make our enjoyment much less. We have to remember all these things. There's so much to remember, isn't there, when we're thinking about nutrition and hydration for people?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
No, thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.